sounds great. I'll take it, Kevin. Thanks. And I'll be very cautious of the time for everybody for sure. We'll just like yesterday, I promise we won't let you out any later than we agreed to. So yeah, this session is really COVID impacts on the fire service, and we're going to tie it to fleet, but we're going to tie it to personnel and what maybe the impacts it had in the fire services in general. And kind of just kicking us off, this COVID thing, I think hit us all from behind, and we thought we'd get over it once, and then we got into waves, right? And nobody likes riding waves or roller coasters unless you go to an amusement park and pay for that ride. Right. So we've adjusted in the fire service, and I think we've done a dang good job of it, especially working with our fleet and our personnel and the organizations to do that. So I really want to just start by doing a real brief intro on everybody. If Jason, you can just give me, obviously who you work for, what you do there, and how long you've been in the business would be great for everybody to kind of understand the background.
Thanks, Eric. My name is Jason Nickelson. I've been with Mesa Fire Medical Department for 20 years now. I'm the fleet administrator for them, and love my job.
Awesome. I was privileged enough to work with Jason over there when I was in Mesa, and man, great people, amazing fleet organization for sure, man. I know you're keeping that legacy going. Mike, give us a little bit.
Hey, good morning. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Johnson. I'm a battalion chief with Loudoun County Fire and Rescue, a combination career and volunteer system in Northern Virginia. I've worked them for 18 years and been in the fire service for 31.
Right on. Scott, go ahead.
Hey, good morning. Scott Yurczyk with the Seattle Fire Department there, 25 years. Western Region Director with Lance Vinson with the FDSOA. I'm currently a health and safety officer with the Seattle Fire Department. And I always add on, I am a recovering mechanical engineer, and I think that's important to understand. If we get into deep conversations, I look at things from a different perspective. So thank you much.
We appreciate that. That's exactly why we chose the panelists we chose, because we have a lot of different perspectives, views, and backgrounds. So, and once again, when Trevor gets in, I'll give him the opportunity to tune in and give a little bit about himself, coming from the Canadian background. So, Mike, why don't you start us off? Why don't you really talk about really what your process, any process change, and what that looked like with your connection with fleet?
I think like everybody else, like you're alluding to, Eric, the COVID pandemic caught everybody off guard. Even in systems that have a pandemic plan, trying to figure this out, we had to really get up to speed. And fortunately for us in our department, we have career personnel, both uniformed and civilian, that work in our fleet section. And then they also help liaise with our outside contract vendors for heavy apparatus maintenance and service and such like that. So having that presence along with the safety division and the EMS division really helped us mesh together and work together to make sure we're on the same page as we work through the pandemic.
So is that something that you met with fleet and talked about what that looks like for both sides?
At the beginning, there was a lot of meetings, just like every other department, with all the different divisions and sections working together, talking about how we could solve the problems as the science and the information was relevant and came to us. So you started out with step one, and then by the time you got to where we are today, we've gone through 100 different steps, thousands of meetings, but it was definitely an evolution that had all partners at the table.
Right on, right on. So I'm going to jump to Jason because it's, I want to get both sides of this picture. And when this thing hit everyone, what did that look like with your expectations on fire and kind of the working interactions with your people in the fire department?
Yeah, Chief, thanks. A lot like Mike just said, we had all the right people get together and discuss how we were going to do things. From a fleet perspective, right, we know that being a single shift, we knew that it was detrimental that we had a plan in place to keep our employees from, getting sick, that they were going to miss some, substantial amount of time, and it would really, really impact our fleet availability and, the sworn guys being able to go out and do their job.
Sounds good. So Scott, let me have you kind of tie both of them together for me. And so what does that look like when you guys were handing trucks off to fleet and getting trucks back from fleet, not that cross contamination We had to make sure that didn't happen, right? And we had to make sure not only on the personal contact side, but transferring it from a hard surface to maybe a mechanic, or back from a mechanic to a firefighter that gets their apparatus back.
Well, in all honesty, I think we didn't do a great job looking back on it. We spun up our response team March 9th, a few days before the overhead team got going. And in all frankness, we got so focused on all of our policy and procedures with regard to personnel, getting people to work, and what we were going to do with regard to patient contact, that in my opinion, we failed our fleet folks completely. I don't think we took care of them in any way close to what we should have done.
What did that do to the relationship? Did they feel that? Did they feel like they failed you in any way?
I think I don't think they. I firstly say I haven't spoken directly with them other than anecdotally where we touch base. I haven't felt any animosity. I think they are so committed to the members of our fleet and mechanic force are so committed to keeping the rigs moving, keeping the frontline firefighters moving and doing what we do, that I unfortunately I think they put themselves in second place, and their commitment is ridiculously high. In many ways, they make me feel guilty that I don't have that commitment that they do, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't have taken better care of them. We did put some things in place with regard to deconning our apparatus, but we essentially did that from our incident management team on our own, for lack of a better term. And we did put some things in place, but I feel we didn't do what we should have done with regard to taking care of our fleets.
So relationships can help a lot with that, right? Those upfront relationships, the trust in each other, and what that looks like, and making sure that everybody feels like they're part of the one team and one mission. And I think that's what I'm hearing from you, Scott, is that, you know, they knew what the mission was, and they had a little bit of understanding with some shortcomings, right, on something
Yes.
that was new to everyone and what that looked like. And so, Jason, you know, I'm going to go back to you now, my man. So, you know, you look at what that looks like from a hiccup, right, and maybe a breakdown in communication and no ill intent. How did you make sure that your mechanics were kept safe and not exposed? And I mean, were you deconning the trucks again, or potentially deconning them when they first got there before you got the process solidified?
Yeah, Chief. So a lot like what Scott just went on. I'm not going to say we were forgotten in the beginning, but obviously when this pandemic broke out, everybody was scrambling to try to do all the right things. Very shortly after we got basically the suppression side figured out on how we were going to do all that stuff, the safety team actually sent out 2 individuals twice a day. They would go around, wipe all of our stuff down, keep no matter whether it was upstairs in the office where I am or down on the floor where mechanics are. They were deconning our facility, like I said, twice a day. And then from the truck perspective, when there was a possible, if one of the crews had contact or whatnot like that, we went through our decon process on that truck before it was delivered to us. And then at that point, if we had anybody at any time that was in possible contact with anybody, we would call that decon team out to do the truck, along with us also doing our own, bleach water mixture spray, up including to when we did call outs, because you never know if you had a call out on the road after hours. We don't know exactly at that point if anybody has a known contact or whatnot. So we would carry that stuff with us and do our own cleaning before.
Okay. And do you guys use PPE when you're cleaning or you're working on apparatus? I mean, that protects you not only from the grease and the grime and the possible carcinogens on your side of the house, but is there a look at what that looks like from a medical sense?
Yes, sir. So that's one of the things that, as this all started, I really tried to get the guys to understand that the gloves and masks and stuff like that go beyond tranny fluid and engine oil. we've also started a transportation program here. We all know that ambulances can carry a lot of stuff. So we just working hand in hand with the guys downstairs and making sure that the gloves are we just wear gloves when we're working on a truck, and to change them out regularly and all that kind of stuff.
Sounds good. And you mentioned small fleet, right? A lot of times we think about just the big fire apparatus and what that looks like when we're talking about fire and fire department and fleet. But you've got administrative vehicles that are going in and out of fleet, right? You get ambulances potentially if your organization transports. Was there a look at all of those from a holistic approach from all vehicles, that even the administrative staff was tying into those things? And I'll lay that one on you, Mike, because you're sitting there looking very interested to answer this question.
Sorry about that. You broke up on me, Eric. You have to repeat that.
Sure. Did I really break up on you? Okay, Scott, why don't you take it? Did you hear me? Oh, you're up.
Repeat your question, please, Eric.
Okay, so there, we talk about light duty fleet as well, right? And we can't forget about those. We can't forget about the ambulances if you transport, and in the light duty administrative staff vehicles that are utilized that ultimately have to go in for PM or for repair and those kind of things. Was there a sense of urgency or concern, not only from the fire apparatus, but from the other small fleet that you're looking at? Because these are all these gaps that we sometimes forget, or we're moving really fast. We have limited information. And we're trying to catch the biggest one first.
Well, our COVID exposure, I shouldn't say exposure group, but our incident team really focused on our transport apparatus, our aid cars and our medic units. We don't BLS transport, but we do ALS transport. So that was where we focused our biggest attention with regard to our team that we spun up. And those were the apparatus that we did cleaning, and this advanced cleaning of, with fogging, with breaking out all the equipment and spraying everything down, wiping everything down. We only did that on a couple of our engines because we realized it was a huge task. We're not that big of a department, 33 stations, but we realized that to do even an aid car or a medic unit, each one was over close to 2 hours. And we just didn't have the resources. We had one team of people doing it, and we just couldn't handle anything beyond our aid cars and medic units. And so we quickly realized that our model was broken. And so we decentralized. We started sending out equipment in the form of HVLP sprayers, and as well as solution for the firefighters to use. And we decentralized. We said, you folks, you got to do it yourselves, because we just can't do it for you. And that literally only took us a few days to realize we just couldn't handle it.
So, pretty important stuff. Jason, when I know when you guys have a mobile mechanic going out to fix some of the small things, because I know you guys are doing that, you've done it for a long time. And I talked a little bit earlier about how the engineer should be out there with the mechanic, working with them. Was there any kind of distancing concerns that obviously the social distancing thing had played into account, and masking and all those things? Was there a legit concern that, okay, when the mechanic comes out, firefighters stay separated, stay in the house, we'll take care of it and we'll let you know when we're done?
Yes, sir. So in terms of if it was a station visit, yes, we would request that the crews just kind of stay in the house. We try to gather as much information as we could before we got there, and then went to more of a texting way of communicating at that point. Now, if it was a road call where they were broke down outside of their station or on our scene, then they tried their best to keep their 6 feet. We had the mask on and stuff like that. We mandated that stuff. And then to go even further, we actually changed our policy there once that hit, to where if the crews had a drive up, that they were not allowed to be in the shop.
So Michael, when when Scott just kind of hit on it a little bit, but out of service time is critically important, right, for the fire department, and that's got to be limited. It's, we go by unit hour utilization, right? We talk about having the right units available for the right calls, and then this COVID thing hits us, and at first we don't realize, I don't know how much we have to do, how little we have to do, and not only deconning our crews, but then deconning the apparatus after it, right? So now we're doing a really good job at deconning after the fire. And now after every potential COVID call, right? Because you don't know, right? You work off signs and symptoms of the patient and what that looks like. So a potential COVID exposure, what's that look like as far as how did you guys manage your out of service time and managing the cleaning and deconning of not only the crew, but the apparatus?
So once we got up to speed, we bought a disinfectant system that basically went from 30 to 45 minutes with a non-toxic vital oxide material. So each station has its own dispersal device. Our administrative buildings do, including our fleet facility. So whenever a crew comes back from a COVID call or any other potential infectious call, they would go ahead and set that up into the system, into the back of the transport unit or the cab of the engine. 30, 45 minutes, it was spraying while they're going out, taking a shower, putting their uniforms into the laundry system, and then switching out. So we might have to put that ambulance out of service for 30 minutes so they could do personal hygiene. And then while the system's disinfecting, and then we get them right back in service. So that worked out very well once we had that system up and running. And then the nice thing was, it was at every work site. Basically, you push a button and it runs itself. And then there's no residue, no wiping down when you're done. Put the unit right back in service.
Awesome. Scott, what experience did you have with it? Managing out of service time.
That was the reason we moved to decentralization. Pulling an aid car, a downtown aid car, our downtown aid cars are running 8,000 runs a year. And we just don't like to pull them out unless we absolutely have to. So that was a big problem. An engine, we did a couple, and it was going to take a couple of hours to do an engine. And again, that has an impact. We have a limited number of resources or units that we're allowed to put out of service any given day for training. And we changed all of our training plans as well. We shut everything down for a while, just to get our arms around COVID. But again, we had to decentralize, but it was just so onerous on our decon team that we put together that we moved away from it.
So, we heard a really great conversation on the cleaner cab concept, because I like that, right? Because, there's a lot of fire apparatus out there that have fabric seats that we have to deal with, that we should be carpet cleaning them, right? Upholstery cleaning those every once in a while, because there's nasty stuff that comes out of them. We should be looking at some kind of maybe an inexpensive seat liner, right? So when they go to and from some of these calls that they may be contaminated by, what does that look like from your thoughts? And have you guys discussed what that looks like moving forward, tied to the cleaner cab? And Jason, I'm going to throw this one at you, because you guys use a different decon product that sounds like it works for both environments.
Yeah, so going back to the first part of your question, we were actually kind of lucky. It was about a year and a half, 2 years ago, we started looking into the cleaner cab concept, and we started that off by first, we made a fire side of the truck and a medical side of the truck. We removed all of our SCBAs out of our cabs and put them back in the box. We did leave the, clean turnout is allowed to be in the cab. And so we were kind of, when this pandemic hit, it seemed to, because we were in front of the game of going to that cleaner cab concept, it just helped us out all around and just trying to battle this whole thing. But yes, and we disinfect with it's called Decon 7.
And that's worked pretty good for you guys.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Michael, what are your thoughts on that?
I think for us in our system in 2018, we had started transforming over into the clean cab concept. So all of our heavy apparatus went to the heavy vinyl seats, smooth surfaces, So it was easier to just clean. We still have SCBA in our apparatus, but we're working to have an SCBA switch out program where if you go on a structure fire, you're going to get a clean SCBA right then and there. And the respiratory protection will take that one. So the clean cab for 3 years helped us immensely going into this, especially with our ambulances and transport units. So when we were at the beginning of COVID, when you had to manually wipe down surfaces, by having a non-porous smooth surface, it made it very easy to sit there and take some over the counter, disinfect it, and then sanitize the units. So very important where those folks who I think already had bought into the clean cab or had started to implement a program, when we hit the COVID pandemic, it probably made it a lot easier for them to disinfect their units.
Scott, anything to add on that? What are you guys doing for clean cab?
We're not where we are, and it's a classic change. It's a classic change management challenge, I think, that many of us face. Policy change is easy, culture change is hard. And I think that's our biggest hurdle right now. And has been talked about the last 2 days, we try to put everything on our rigs, that including the kitchen sink. And so the first conversation is, where do we put our air packs? Like Mike, we still carry them with, you just think some days you just have this realization, wow, we're just not getting it yet. And I believe that we're still struggling with that, and we will get there. I know it's active in our minds, but it hasn't become active in our actions yet on improving that whole concept of clean cab. We have a lot of new apparatus, and they're better without question. And the biggest hurdle still is the culture change of not being, the big one right now that Mike just hit, SCBA is not in the cab. We have a culture where we want to get off the rig ready to go. And we couch that on the public expects that as well. But there's trade-offs. And so we're working through those issues. They're big issues, they're challenging issues. But we're not working, in my mind, nearly as aggressively enough on clean cab concepts. It's on our list, but we're not there yet.
So Jason, I know when it hit hard in Arizona, and I think the rest of the country was in the same boat when the mask mandate happened, the federal mask mandate. Everybody started rolling into masks, and we started looking around, feeling like we're Asia at some point, right? I know a lot of people made comments about that wasn't the norm for us, right? And then we started looking at firefighters going, "Are you telling me I have to wear a mask in the station?" And I said, "Yeah, you have to wear a mask in the station." It's weird. It was weird. How did you manage that? And how were you able to police that in your area as far as fleet?
To be honest, Chief, it was hard. I think Scott kind of hit on a little bit with the whole culture change. You got mechanics, right? They're rough and tough, and they'll change tranny fluid and eat a sandwich right after they get no big deal. So it was pretty rough. I think our chief did a really good job of how she delivered our mask mandate. And I think everybody just kind of got to the point, at least from the shop side, where it was like, okay, we get it. We understand how important it is for us to stay healthy, because the effect that's going to happen down the road for the truck side would be crazy. So our guys it was a little rough in the beginning, but I think after maybe 2 weeks, I'm trying to sound good, but they got it, and they did a good job, and staying home and just understanding how important our job is for you guys to be able to get out there and help everybody.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, because like I said before, we're a team, and we're all links in a chain, right? And if your staffing goes away and trucks can't get fixed, then we're not going to be able to roll, right? And it's the same thing we face in the fire department. So what, as far as a staffing perspective, Michael, what did that look like for you guys? What was the plan? Because I know in Scottsdale, we were getting hit super hard. I mean, it was a point where we were before we knew a whole lot, and the CDC was kind of changing their direction on a probably a daily basis sometimes, right? As we learned more, that once you were exposed, you had to be tested and be negative to get back on a truck. And then we had so many firefighters exposed from others that we just we said, we just can't take any more units out of service. I mean, people have to roll, right? And what that looks like. And then you put that kind of pressure on the workforce, because the healthy ones are going to have to work more hours, which defeats, right, and beats down their immune system. So what did that look like for you guys, Michael? What you guys talk about? What did you work through as far as the plans for staffing?
So we have a staffing officer for our career side, and then a deputy chief over our volunteer programs. So his job is to help liaise with all the volunteer memberships to see what their staffing levels were. And then we actually dedicated staff to just monitoring those who have been exposed and then went into quarantine situations. So those folks would be contacted on a daily basis. They would be tracked, especially if they became symptomatic. So by having those people work with our staffing group, we would make sure that, hey, we can keep track on a daily basis. Plus, in the Washington, D.C. region, all the metropolitan departments in that region also provided information. So regionally, we can also track how many people were positive, how many people were in quarantine, just so everybody had that situational awareness. For the career side, if need be, we have voluntary overtime. So if somebody were to be put out for 2 weeks, we could easily just fill that spot on voluntary overtime. If not, we would revert back to mandatory overtime. And then fortunately for us, we have a very strong volunteer membership in our system. So if we had to pull a whole volunteer medic unit out of 3 or 4 people out of service for 2 weeks, that individual corporation had a strong membership to help put them back in service, fill that gap. If not, they would reach out to their other volunteer partners next door, or the career personnel could help supplement that.
And awesome. That's it. It sounds like you guys had a really good thought process and what that looks like. I know we have a friend in Texas that their department got hit so hard that they were working, instead of 3 shifts, there was 2 shifts, 48 on, 48 off. And I know some had to get to that point. And I know that was working the workforce hard. What was your staffing plan, Jason, from a fleet perspective tied to this?
Pretty much what the same. I mean, being limited with 6 mechanics, it would basically come down if one of our guys did end up getting sick or have to quarantine for the 14 days, we were looking at overtime, 6 days a week or whatnot. And thank God we were just blessed that it just never happened. But, even there were times where myself and my shop foreman would go down and help out on the floor and stuff like that. If, we did have a close contact. They were able to stay here without quarantine, but we just helped out from that.
So did you have a scorched earth process that you had a connection with an outside vendor, that if it got that bad that you had contracts and things in place that you could have shuffled some of your work to potentially?
No, I think at that point, Chief, we would have been probably calling some of the local vendors, and some of the other area fleets if it got to that point, then we would have to try to utilize that.
And that makes sense. And just so everybody knows, Jason's just down the street from Scottsdale, and we work in an auto aid system that has about 27 different departments and agencies that dispatch automatically. Closest unit gets the call, and we work that closely together. So, same type of academy they go through. We communicate really well from a fleet perspective, I think, regionally, as far as sharing parts off shelves. And so it makes it for a lot bigger resource. But I know some of the smaller organizations, there had to be a backup plan to have an outside vendor potentially take that and look at it. So, I'm going to drive this a little bit different. I beat up it really hard about the exposure, the potential, the cleaning, the deconning, and I always joke that there was finally a federal mandate that you had to wash your hands, right? Like, it wasn't good enough that your parents told you to wash your hands. You had to have a federal mandate that the feds had to tell you, right? So we started washing our hands, which was great. But we look at this, and I think in our future perspective of what this is going to look like for us, I think we're going to manage things a little bit different, right? Because we had all those other potentials. Cold and flu, we don't talk about that anymore, but that's still around, folks, right? We're talking about COVID has consumed everything, but we're not seeing the flu and cold numbers. MRSA big issue, right? For fire departments and potentially not deconning their equipment good enough, or there could be a potential exposure to a fleet mechanic and what that looks like, because there's some nasty things that firefighters get exposed to, not just the carcinogens, but to the medical issues and concerns. That all of this brought us some heightened awareness to what we do in our industry and on both sides of the house, both fleet and fire. And so when we look at what that looks like moving forward, and, you know, I truly believe that we'll still do temperature checks during certain times of the year. You'll still have to sign in and say, yeah, I don't have a cough, right? What a concept. Don't come to work sick and get others sick, right? All these things we're learning that, like, you think about it, you're like, yeah, why weren't we doing that before, right? And that could have potentially lowered some of our sick call out numbers and exposures to our people. What does it look like for you, Scott, for Seattle moving forward, taking what we've learned from COVID and moving it to the you know, to down the road when we're not dealing with this craziness and we get back to what our new state of normalcy is?
Well, I think, you know, like any good incident, a good post-incident analysis is in order for us to do. And I know one of the takeaways for me is we need to take better care of our administrative folks, specifically our fleets and facilities, our fleets folks, because we just don't do that. And it's something on my list to do. We need to develop some policies. We have to, you know, because we still are tracking a lot of junk into our rigs, regardless of COVID. And it's horrible, the stuff that we walk through on a daily basis and leave in our apparatus and then take it down to the shop, you know, 5 minutes after that last run without doing anything. And we need to do that or do a better job of that. So, and you both have touched on a really interesting point. Just statistically in Seattle, we had one person that I'm aware of that got COVID from a patient, but we've had 50, or not quite that many, 40 that got it from another firefighter coming to work sick. The lion's share of all of our exposure work was firefighters coming to work sick, almost 95%. It was crazy. And it's interesting. And one of the things a little outside, you know, we had a contingency plan, our pandemic plan that was like 12 years old, talked about all these different staffing models, how we're going to staff our administrative offices and yada, yada. When that was written before the internet had the power that it had, when COVID really hit, everyone just stayed home on the administrative side and started working from home. So just a total something that we couldn't even have foreseen coming down the road. So lots of post-incident work to be done on all levels.
Michael, what does that look like for you guys moving forward?
I think Eric and everybody, I think I'm a little worried about what the next month or two looks like. For the last year, we've been oversaturated on a daily basis, 24/7 with COVID, mask mandates, all this information, frustrations among members. Now that the mask mandates are starting to be lifted, I worry that people will take too much of a pause. They're going to get too relaxed again, and they might drop their guard a little bit. So that worries me. You know, it's over with. The big COVID's over with. We haven't talked about the flu. We haven't talked about the cold. We haven't talked about MRSA. But for us, I think it's going to be prudent to sit down with all of us and our division leaders. We need to make sure logistics, EMS, fleet facilities, all these groups are together talking about, hey, let's, like Scott said, review what we had in place, what worked, what didn't work, what can we do better, and then we need to sit there and revise and implement. And then from there, it's lead by leadership, lead by example, and then we need to enforce our policies, continue moving forward, because it starts with the clean cap concept, and then you keep building off of that. So if we don't stay on top of this, we're going to drop our guard again. That's what worries me.
No, I agree. You know, and I was just telling our risk manager, I said, you know, we have to understand firefighters work in a submarine, right? It's like they live in a submarine because they're in a truck all the time going to and from calls and going to training. And then they're in the fire station. What do? We want the crews to be interactive, right? We don't want the crews to go sit in their own space and not work together. It's a tight knit team, right? And so when you have someone that comes to work And it's in you're transferring that viral load that's not only just time sensitive, but amount of exposure. You can see why what Scott was saying is that the exposures happen with firefighter to firefighter, not the limited time when we're wearing an N95 and we're making sure we're doing the right things and we clean up after. We don't do that. The station it's like a second home for us, right? We're relaxing with that and feel a little bit comfortable to kind of wind down a little bit. Jason, what does that look like for you guys moving forward as far as keeping your people safe of sickness?
So I think it's actually going to be a relatively just this whole thing, just a great transition. Like I mentioned earlier, especially with us going into the transportation business, for my guys, it's almost natural now to always have gloves on, to always wear their eye protection, if they're to use the exhaust tubes, to just all this stuff. So I think as much as this pandemic is hurting, there's some positives I think that we're all getting out of this that just make it easier and make us all understand that, I think Scott mentioned it's more than just COVID. There's so much more that's hidden in there, and to be conscious of that, and being able to clean and just do all that stuff and know that we have the time to do that. It doesn't take but seconds to wipe a steering wheel down. So I think it's just going to be, I'm hoping that it's just going to continue to stay easy.
So I'm gonna end with a kind of a final thought and a question to everyone. I know that and Jason, you and I talked a little bit about this, about what potential personnel impacts, right? Every good leader knows that the most valuable asset they have is their personnel, right? If they don't know that, they probably shouldn't be in a leadership position, right? So how do we take care of our people? What does that look like? And what are we watching their sensitivity meter, right? So I know from Scottsdale Fire, I know from the regional departments I work with, is there's been a heavy lift on the fire service, right? Mentally, physically, not only the concern and worry about exposure, which every firefighter knows that if they're exposed, then they're exposing their family at some point, right? So there's this heavy stress load that lays on a firefighter's heart and mind every day, all day. And then you put them in positions where they have to work a lot of overtime. You're running them ragged, right? Call volume is now starting to pick up. Even when it dropped because of COVID, they were going on more of the critical calls, right, on a regular basis. And then all the work they had to do after the call, right? So there was not a lot of downtime, even though the call volume dropped, because there was decon, exposure reporting, and all the other things that we talked about. So, from a behavioral health perspective, we all need to be worried about that and concerned about that. So, Scott, I don't know if your organization's talked about it, but what does that look like for next steps and keeping an eye on your people and maybe resources available for them to realize, hey, you're tired and you need to take care of yourself. And what does that look like?
I don't think we've gotten our arms around it yet. I think we're still struggling with, as Mike said, we want this to be done and we want to walk away and we don't want to ever look back, specifically around our firefighter culture with regard to protocols. And you're talking about it right now in the fire stations. Our biggest challenge, our patient contact behavior has been perfect. We're very good at that. But back at the barn, back in the station, we let our guard down and we don't take care of ourselves as well as we should. I think there will be some definite products coming out of this, but we're so in the moment still, because the turmoil right now is with, as Jason mentioned, CDC saying, drop your mask. Mike was saying it too. You don't need to wear them. Well, as soon as a firefighter hears that on the news, you know what that turns into at the fire station, and that's still our biggest challenge, because it's still around us, and we don't have a vaccination mandate. I don't think very many departments do. So it's still alive and well. We're still getting people exposed. And I would hope that moving forward, we learn from this and we take better care of our internal folks. We do a better job of what we've been supposed to be doing our whole careers, 25 years for me, of doing a better job of deconning our apparatus and our equipment after every run. That would be the expectation I would like to see lifted, that when we take our rig down and to get it fixed, that we actually treat it like the next crew's coming on and wash the doggone thing, not just the outside, but wipe down the equipment. There's so much improvement we can do. And it takes a lot of energy. It takes, that long haul, the marathon. It's a marathon event. And just because COVID ends, our work is far from over.
Well, and it's a heavy lift, and it's more workload, right? And everybody's taxed, and everybody has little bandwidth left to fill with new programs and new processes. And what did we just do? We came up with something that's consuming a lot of everyone's time. Michael, you want to close us out on what your thoughts are on the behavioral health sides for your firefighters and what that looks like in the fire service in general?
Well, I think fortunately before COVID, it took a long time, but there was a culture change in the fire service. Behavioral health was becoming a prominent talking point. For a lot of us who've been in this for several decades, it is no more you just have to swallow it. You don't have to eat it anymore. You can talk to people. It's okay to ask how you're doing. So fortunately, a lot of that culture had shifted prior to COVID. And then through COVID, I think we all wanted to remain cognizant of it because we're stressed out. We can't go outside. We can't do things with our family and our friends. The children were struggling with everything. So I think that continued to manifest during the COVID. And then as we move out, it's very important to continue the peer support, our EAP programs, continuing to check on one another. If somebody seems off, it's still okay. Hey, what's going on, Eric? How you doing today? So the things that we had started pre-COVID, we need to continue moving forward, and we need to keep building the behavioral health protocols, team support, funding. Leadership needs to continue to buy in, support these programs. And just remember, it just isn't for the men and women in uniform. It's our civilian staff, our administrative staff, the men and women working logistics, fleet, facilities. We need to check on them too, because they're getting a lot of that pressure as well.
Well, I don't want to forget about the volunteer side of this thing. I know the volunteer group were facing the same things and dealing with it in similar ways. And I want to make sure that the volunteer group knows there's a ton of resources out there for those things, right? I've always said the three big killers of firefighters are cancer, cardiac, and behavioral health, right? And so we've got to make sure we're on top of that from both career and volunteer perspectives. And I know the association, the FDSOA, is always there to support if you need resources or contacts or whatever you need on any of those or anything tied to safety in the fire service. Please reach out and let us know. I want to thank all of you for jumping in and participating. Man, great people with great experience, and I know I got a lot out of it from you guys, and I hope the audience did as well. Thank you so much for jumping in.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Chief. See you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.